As we look at this here this morning, again, I told you I was going to focus on one verse, but I'm going to give you just a little bit of this. I told you as we talked about when Jesus came and and as he ascended back, that he had set the world on its head, that he had changed everything, and the powers that be did not like it. It was affecting them, it was affecting their pockets, it was affecting their control, it was affecting the power which that they had over the people. I want us to understand that Saul, he had favor with these people that were in high places. Saul was he was a mighty man. He was a learned man. He was very much learned in the religious group of people. He knew he knew their ways. He knew exactly what it is that they was wanting to accomplish. He was, if you will, a hired hand, so to speak. He was the muscle. He was the bouncer. We can look so many different terms into this, but what Saul was doing is Saul was seeing that this was affecting him. It was affecting his way of life. It was affecting those that were around him that took care of him. And Saul said, hey, I can handle this. You can turn back a page or two and you can begin looking. It said in Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hauling men and women and committed them to prison. I want you to know that if you so much as breathed the word Christianity, Saul was coming for you. If you so much as spoke the word Jesus and talked of what he had did and any about conversion into being saved, Saul was coming. Saul was going to put you, honey, in the jail. Saul was going to put you there. Saul sought to kill these people. I want you to understand that Saul was attempting to squash the church. And he thought he was doing a good job at it. But you can't stop what Jesus has started. No matter how many people Saul went to find, there were more. And what Saul couldn't see is while this was happening, Christianity was like a wildfire in dry grass. It would just spread. It exploded because they was hearing that these high and mighty people were trying to shut everybody else up, and it just spread. It ran. What Saul was not realizing that just by him trying to squash the church was helping it to spread. It was helping it spread in different ways. One, because people were talking about it, and others, people were running. And when they were running, they would go far and wide, and they'd say, who are you running from? We're running from Saul. Why? Well, because we believe in Jesus. Well, who's Jesus? Well, let me tell you about him. It spread. It exploded. And Saul was just trying to protect his way of life, the way of life that he had known. The only thing that he had known was then being threatened, and he decided, ain't going to happen. I will fight this to the bitter end. He says, I'm going to squash it. He went to the high priest and he said, give me warrants. Just give me an open-ended warrant that I can go and arrest anybody that even breathes Jesus. And they said, okay, here you go. And he took with him people to help. We're a lot more like Saul than we think. We're a lot more like Saul than we are Paul. Let me tell you why. Because Jesus threatens our way of life. Jesus threatens what we know as normal. Jesus starts a good work in us. He begins changing us into His image. He does this by spiritual guidance. He does this by putting the Holy Spirit within us. By conviction, showing us what sin is, showing us our shortcomings, showing us what we can no longer do. Just as Jason had used the example of smoking this morning, and God had spoke to his heart and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. He began to change what Jason knew. Little by little. And he that has began to do this good work unto you is going to continue that until Jesus comes. Friend, Jesus ain't here, so you're still being shaped and you're still being molded, and God is still working on changing you. And get this, you can't stop it. Amen. We will resist. You will resist the Spirit, you will quench the Spirit, you will vex the Spirit, all these different things that we do against the Spirit, but friend, you will not stop it. Saul's way of life was threatened. What he knew as normal, his everyday, his routine, his life was threatened. And it was threatened by Jesus. It was threatened by the gospel. It was threatened by the spreading of the good news. And so was ours. Our sinful lives, that is. Our fleshly lives, that is. The part of us that enjoys the world is threatened by Jesus. Saul, breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way. It's what we were referred to once. Before we was Christians, we was just of the way. In the way of them, if you will. But he said, if I find any of them, and he didn't discriminate. He didn't care if they was men, women, children, boys, girls, old, young, didn't matter to him. He just wanted to find people that were threatening unto his, like we said, his way of life. He wanted to find them. He was going to bind them, put them in prison. Because that's the only thing he could think of to stop it. The only thing I can think of to stop the spread of Christianity is to put it in a box. That box being a prison cell. That's the only thing I know to do. And those people that talk about it, the only way I know to make them hush is to kill them. And that's what he was doing. He done the only thing that he knew to do. This was all that he could think of. This was his solution. It was just to squash it. These religious people. Because that is who Saul worked for, was the religious people. Those that quite honestly had everything that they needed to know that this was Jesus, He was the Son of God, and this was exactly what needed to happen. They had all that. Because when we are saved, the only life that we have known was a sinful life. That's all we knew. All we know is the natural part of us is the wrong. We have to learn and to be transformed into the good. But at first, when God starts pulling things out of our lives, well, you don't need this. We need to get rid of that. Let's get this out of the way. Let's move this too. When these things start happening, the natural thing for us to do is to resist, and we got to squash it. Jesus is trying to take everything that I know away from me. I need to take Him out, put Him in this little box, and just hold on to it, because that's all I really need. I just need Jesus. I don't need all the rest of it. So we will fight and resist and attempt to squash all the rest of it. You know, the people that will begin to talk to us and witness to us and tell us that maybe what we're doing ain't quite right. You know why we quit coming to Sunday school? Why we quit coming to church? Why we quit coming to Wednesday night class? Why we quit coming to Sunday night? Because we don't want to hear what Jesus is doing, and we do not want to know that what we're doing is wrong, so we attempt to squash it. We are Saul. Saul goes forth and he's hunting these things. We do the same thing. We are resisting. We are attempting to stop something that you can't stop. The will of God is 10 times bigger than you are. Amen. You can't stop it. But we'll fight against it. And we'll keep fighting. Some of us are good fighters. We could probably go 15 rounds with Holyfield. We probably could. We'll pick any boxer that you want to go. We're good enough fighters. We could have the endurance. We could go 15 rounds in a heavyweight bout. I mean, we are fighting against the will of God, and we are still resisting. With all the knowledge that you have sitting within your laps, the access that you have, the amount of people that is in our life that we can contact, that we could reach out to, that we could question, that we could attempt to learn. And we'll just keep fighting. Saul was well on his way. He went. He was going to do the only thing that he knew to do. This was his attempt at self-preservation. This is what he went forth to do. And then all of a sudden, he ran into Jesus. Jesus knew exactly who he was. He didn't have to say, hey, little man, who are you and why are you attempting to kill all my people? He knew exactly who he was. He called him by name and he said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Saul says, who are you? You know, there's a lot of people that think immediately that Saul knew exactly who Jesus was. I think the first Lord that he says is just a way of saying, sir. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have needed to introduce himself. He says, I am Jesus, the person that you are fighting against. He says, I'm Jesus. You know that guy you're trying to squash? You know the guy that you're trying to stop? Hey, I'm him. And I'm here. And not only was Saul hearing this voice and having this conversation, but there was an overwhelming, blinding light that was now like piercing his eyes and he couldn't see. He could see nothing. He became helpless in a moment. This mighty man, this man of valor that was going forth to wage war against the Christians, fell to his knees, blinded and helpless, because he ran into Jesus. There was no more fighting. You can't fight what you can't see, can you? Can you? I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. And then in this sentence that he says it's rather hard for you to kick against the pricks. That was a long stick that had metal, like a little metal spike on the end of it. And its sole purpose, the only purpose for that, was to steer a stubborn animal. That's why it was there. You understand that? It was there to steer a stubborn animal, to either make them to go, to make them to turn, to make them to do this or to that. When they refused to move, when they decided they was going to buck up and they wasn't going to do anything. And Jesus says, you know, it's not very wise of you. It's hard to kick against the pricks because it's just going to hurt. It's going to hurt more and it's going to hurt worse. The wounds are going to get deeper. He says, you can't stop this. You can't stop what God has started. And he simply says, it's hard for you to kick against the pricks. Why we fight? Christian, let me ask you this. You know who God is, right? Of course you do. You know who He is, or else you wouldn't be saved. So why do you fight against Him? Knowing who God is, knowing what He's capable of, knowing what He can do, knowing all these things, but yet we still think that we are strong enough to fight against Jesus. And Jesus simply says, it is hard for you to kick against the pricks. He says, you are a stubborn animal. And He will poke us, He will prod us, He will make us go. You can't stop what God has started. When we try, things happen. Saul was blinded. He was stopped dead in his tracks on a mission that he decided that he wanted to do. This was not anything that was thought up of and he was sent forth by others. This was on his own self-will. This was what he had come up with. This was his plan that he had concocted, and he got approval to do it. And he went forth and he was stopped dead in his tracks. And the people that traveled with him, his army, if you will, they were stopped too. And they were all astonished. So this mighty man who was on a mission to squash Christianity, someone had to hold his hand and lead him the rest of the way of his journey. He didn't know where he was going. He knew where he was told to go, and he knew what he was told to do. But he didn't know how to get there. He couldn't make it on his own. He could not make it on his own. Christian, there's a direct correlation that is here with us as well. Because when God blinds us, when He stops us in our tracks, when He says, I'm done fighting against you, you are now going to listen, and He lays the hammer down, you're going to have somebody to help you. Christians, that's why we got to be here to stick our hand out and help somebody up. But instead we'll say, well, they've made their bed, now they can lay in it. Yeah, maybe they can. Maybe they was kicking against the pricks. Maybe God has intervened. Maybe we need to lift one another up. Maybe we need the edification. Maybe that's why we are there. Because you read on down through there, they led him into the city. He was blind. He couldn't see. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He was deeply troubled and disturbed on the inside, because I truly believe now that all these thoughts were racing through his head that this is Jesus. Jesus is who He said He was. What am I going to do if this man that we killed, that we buried, and He rose again? If this man had came and He knows me, what's going to happen now? Can you imagine the amount of emotion that Saul felt? Because he was blind. And he knows what he had been doing to these people, these Christians, these early church people. He knows how he'd been treating them. He knows that he had been belittling them. He knows that he had been making fun of them. He knows that he had been persecuting them. We can look at this in all the different ways that when we are resisting God, how we will poke so much fun at our brothers and sisters in Christ, how we are say hurtful and harmful things to them, how we'll gather together with our sinner friends and make fun of them. Saul was at their mercy. He was, because he couldn't see. And I don't think that in those 3 days he developed no kind of like echolocation senses where he could, be able to fight like Daredevil or nothing like that. That wasn't going to happen. He sat there, and I believe he sat there scared to death. But could you imagine Ananias? Could you imagine when God spoke to him and said, Hey, I need you. Do you know this guy named Saul? And he's thinking, do I know him? I've been running from him. Yeah, I know exactly who he is. And Jesus says, oh, good. Since you know him, I need you to go in there and give him his sight back. You're going to help this young man. And so, no, wait. Hold up. So not only was Saul trying to stop what God had started, now Ananias is saying, oh, wait a minute, are you sure? Jesus, do you know who this is? This is the guy who has went around all these regions and he's been hunting us down, he's been persecuting us. Do you not remember your buddy Stephen? Do you not remember him? Hey, he was a part of that. Do you not remember this? Do you not remember that? Do you not remember that all these people that he was just locking up and throwing in the jail for your name's sake, and you want me to go help him? Jesus could have said the same thing to Ananias. He could have said, Ananias, I want you to know something. It's very hard for you to kick against the pricks because you can't stop what I've started. Because he went on to tell him, I got a plan for this old boy. Because Saul had everything that Jesus needed. He was bold. He was bold enough to do the wrong thing and to be proud of it. He was bold enough to stand up for what he believed and take his beliefs into those above him to go fight for them for the wrong reasons. He was bold enough to do that. Not only was he bold enough to do that, but Saul was an educated man. He had grown up in this religious sect. He knew these people. He knew about them. Could you imagine if we took our talents that we have to fight against God and use those talents in fighting for God? Could you imagine what we could do? When Saul changed his focus to squashing the church, to building the church, look at what he did. He wrote half the New Testament. I mean, think on that. Look at the amount of people that Paul touched when he changed his focus. When God had began that good work in him, when he had began that work in him, when he was on the road to Damascus and he blinded him with the light, sent him to his knees, when he started the good work, he finished it. But that began with another person's obedience. Otherwise, he blinded Saul for no reason. Jesus spoke to Ananias and he said, go to Saul. I need you to help him. I need you to restore his sight. And all he knows is that there's a man named Ananias and he's going to be the one that comes to speak to him. He's at this location. Give him the address, punch it in the GPS for him. There you go. Go here. You'll find him. And if Jesus could use Paul, at that time, if Jesus could use Saul, this person who had wreaked havoc upon the church, caused all this destruction on the church, caused people to run and hide in fear. Yet this, you know the people that Jesus encourages you to talk to, that wants you to speak to, and you're like, what do you want with them? You can't stop what God has started. It's hard for us to kick against the pricks. You have faith believing in Christ? Yeah. Do you believe that God is all-knowing? Yep. Do you believe that God has a plan? Yep. Do you believe that nothing surprises God? He's sitting on His throne and exactly the things that He desires to happen happens. You believe that? I believe that God is almighty. I believe He's all-powerful. I believe that God is the great I am. I believe that God is everything that He says He is. I believe that all these things are possible. So I don't believe you and I can win a resistance battle.
Amen.
I don't believe that we know more than God does when He says, hey, I need you to witness to this person. I need you to speak to them. And you're saying, well, God, why? Do you not know who they are? You know, I know that man's been a drug addict for the last 40 years. There ain't nothing I'm going to say going to change him. Maybe he's been on the road to Damascus and he's been blinded and he's fell to his knees and he needs someone to restore his sight. Maybe God knows what He's doing, and maybe you and I don't need to kick against the pricks, because you can't stop the will of God.
Amen.
What we will simply do is we will resist it, and we will pass the blessings that God has for you on to somebody else. Had Ananias not went to Saul, do you know what God would have done? He would have found somebody to went to Saul. Ananias would have lost that blessing. He would have lost that portion of his reward. He would have lost that. He would have not been obedient. He would have been the one kicking against the pricks, and then he would have been the one in trouble. When you know what the will of God is, why fight it? Well, let's move back to self-examination. Talking to the Christians this morning, Christians only at this point. Born-again believers. Is it God's will for you to live a sinful life? It is not. Contrary to your belief, contrary to this great misconception in the society in which we live, it is not God's will for you to live a sinful life, so why live it? You're not going to stop the plans that God has for your life. I want you to know that if God has a specific plan for you, friend, He's going to accomplish that. He might have to drag you under the water. He might have to blind you. He might have to put you in the hospital. He might have to put you on your deathbed with 3 minutes to live to accomplish what He has for you in your life. But friend, once you accomplish that, it's too late because you're on your deathbed. I want you to understand. Why kick against the pricks? God's going to win. You have your Bible. You can read that. Why do we have to be these stubborn animals that have to be poked and prodded? Just as Jason was taught in Sunday school this morning, what God's plan for you and I is to walk as though He had walked, to follow in the steps that He has stepped, to have the mind of Christ, to not serve out of fear of, oh, if I don't do this, something bad's going to happen, to serve out of the fact that this is God's will and this is what I want. I want God's will. It may not be mine, but why fight it? I'm not going to stop it. I've said that so many times. You won't stop the will of God. You can be a part of it. You can't serve two masters. You don't know where Jesus says that? Friend, if we're Christian, we got to be Christian. If you're saved, you've got to be saved. And that means everything that goes along with it. That means the lifestyle, the conversation, the way that everything about you should speak saved other than your mouth. When our mouth is the only thing about us that says that we are saved, friend, we got a problem and we're kicking against the pricks. I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. And it is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. If you're saved this morning, you're on the winning team, correct? Because you have been bought and paid for by the blood of Christ, you are adopted in to the winning side. So why do you fight against the winning side? There's no room for mutiny in the house of God. You're for it or you're against it. There's no in between. Let me ask you to stand together with us here this morning.